Hello, this is John with Theology Ed. I hope you're all doing really well today. All right, so there's a lot going on in the world, and I just want to show you where this may fit into the predictive programming and what might be going on. I'm thinking in particular about two things that are going on. One, what's happening in Minnesota, the U.S., civil unrest, the ICE versus the left slash pro immigration group and groups and protesters, and then also on the other hand Iran. Now we've looked at predictive programming from the Shattered Union trailer, a video game trailer from years ago, where there's a term of a presidency in which there is a gradual descent over a period of 4 years into from some civil unrest into basically almost a police state, federal police state, into states seceding and civil war after a false flag attack. It appears, and so that was something we followed before, and we've looked at that pattern and how it may have application in the real world here in the U.S. However, now we're seeing events like this starting to unfold. I mean, these are pictures from in the last week or two. Looks actually very similar to the sorts of things in the trailer, what you would expect from a federal crackdown on protesters, opposition, and so on. We also are seeing in Minnesota talk that does appear to be Civil War-like, not just protesters versus law enforcement, but state versus federal government. Walt saying things that treat the state as being invaded by the federal government, or getting their own National Guard troops ready to defend the population against, for example, the federal government and ICE agents and so on. Trump is threatening to use the Insurrection Act to put military, to bring U.S. troops into Minnesota in order to control and stop the violence and the uprising, if you think of it this way. So Pentagon is readying 1,500 soldiers to possibly deploy to Minnesota. And when you see the language here, the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, is speaking about what's going on as an invasion of the federal government. That's not standard language for this sort of thing, right? We're not going to give them an excuse to do the thing that clearly they're trying to set up to do right now, which is these 1,500 troops, Frey told CNN. I never thought in a million years that we would be invaded by our own federal government. That's war language, right? And Stephen Miller says the Minnesota authorities are ordered to stand down and surrender to federal officers. Again, that language is war language, right? Surrender, invasion, state versus federal government. We're getting sort of the pieces in place for what looks like potentially even imminent civil war. Not tomorrow, probably. I mean, nothing like that. But we're approaching it in a way where the story makes sense, right? Where you can see this isn't random people trying to fight against the U.S. This is a state with perhaps organized, with organized armed people, police or state National Guard, whatever, troops and so on, preparing them to actually fight federal military at some point. Okay, and at the same time as we have that civil unrest heating up, I mean, this is really getting sort of nasty, especially in Minnesota, but other states as well, they're doing this. We have all this stuff that's been going on recently with Iran and their protests, the violence over there, and threats from Trump to invade and to deal with, perhaps try to achieve a regime change in Iran and so on. A few days ago they were talking about the possibility of an imminent attack within 24 hours. At the same time, we had the Verizon users experiencing outages in various places throughout the United States, which, again, that was sort of similar to what was happening in Leave the World Behind, where, phone service was down first, and then you had this gradual escalation of what could have been used as a pretext for a larger war, saying that there was some sort of cyber attack from a country like Iran or whatever, in Leave the World Behind. It's sort of, you're left in the dark about what it is, because the film sort of shows the perspective of the people in the U.S. when things get worse, where they won't have much information. They'll be in the dark about what's happening while the world is sort of falling to pieces around them, until finally it comes to them directly. Now, but these things were all happening at one time, and then, the order never came. This is 20 hours ago, roughly, from now, this screenshot I took more recently. Iran warns an attack would be the declaration of war. But meanwhile, still en route is the USS Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carrier. His group are going over there to the enter strike range of Iran. Okay? So here we have USS Abraham Lincoln moves into strike range of Iran. The USS Abraham Lincoln is moving into a position where it could hit Iran within days at its current pace. It's in strike range, or will be in strike range, around January 23rd. I'm not sure exactly of the accuracy here of the exact timing, but the point is it's on its way still. So things seem to have calmed down, but we have this aircraft carrier moving over there, and Trump had made promises effectively to the Iranian people that if they keep protesting, we'll be there to protect you, and so on. And some of them have claimed to be sort of disillusioned by the fact that he never did, wondering what happened. But in the past, when Trump says things like this, he eventually sort of follows through, whether you like it or not, whether it's good or bad, or whatever his motivation actually is, even if it's not to actually help people, but he has some other motivation. But this is a pretext for use of force. Often when he says something, he does it, like he's threatening this Greenland takeover. That's concerning, because look what he did with Venezuela, for example. Who knows where this is all headed? It's getting ugly. But the USS Lincoln is en route to the Middle East still. Interestingly, that is one of the two aircraft carrier groups, or aircraft carriers, permanently stationed in, I think it's San Diego, but in California. Okay. And that may or may not be relevant, but I'm going to talk about that in a second too, because we're going to look at the predictive programming. Now, remember, these two things happening at once is very interesting, because we have, on the one hand, civil unrest taking off in the U.S. We have even a state versus federal government standoff, effectively. And we have an uprising of the people who feel like they've been hunted, immigrants and pro-immigrant persons, the left and so on, by the federal government. So we're having the uprising, if you want to think of this, of the hunted returning and fighting back against the hunter. This goes to Leave the World Behind. Remember, in Leave the World Behind, you had a Donnie Darko style layout with the clock at the White House that the white family goes to, which was owned by the black family. And I have a whole series on Leave the World Behind, which I think is important. This was an Obama-produced film. And what happened is it's representing the U.S. entering an unstable tangent universe, like in Donnie Darko, with the election of Trump in November 2016, when the white family occupied Obama's home, the White House, in Washington, D.C. is what it's pointing to. And this unstable tangent universe continued for a period of time until it collapses back on itself at that time, meaning goes back to another Trump versus Democrat election in November, which was November 2024, or 2020. to 24. Okay, so when he's going to be running for office again, or when he did, relative to the film, he was going to be. And when he's readmitted to the White House and Leave the World Behind, the White family lives there for a while, then leaves the White House, then comes back to the White House, and the daughter Ruth asks her father, why did you let him back in? And he said, it's the right thing to do. And she says, that right there is what's going to screw us over in the end. The idea is when Trump gets back his second time to the White House, that's what's going to destroy us. This is the collapsing of the unstable tangent universe back into the primary universe, talking Donnie Darko style, which has the potential to destroy the whole world. Okay? And that is what's happening. And in the film, it shows, a collapse happening. And then we saw the representative of the Trump family with the representative of the Democrats and the minorities and so on here. She is coming at her. The girl backs up under the leaves to look like a deer. And then after this conversation, she comes back at her, leaves the deer antlers, the leaves, and goes after the Trump representative here, the Trump family, and we see the fighting back of the deer. And when that happens outside, we get this too. The deer all come against them, okay? And they can't get them to stop this time. They're not stopping. They're going to stay there and be threatening and almost attack. And simultaneously in Leave the World Behind, we have the Trump-Obama representatives, symbolically in the film, okay, against Danny, who has a Lone Star Dallas Cowboys hat on, representing states, saying we're no longer friends like we used to be. And they have their guns drawn. They are almost shooting at each other. Okay? We are very close to a state-on-federal government war here. And these are going together. These two events are simultaneously being represented here. So we have the uprising of the previously hunted, the left, against the executive branch, if you want to think of it, the federal government. And then down here you have it as a state government against a federal government resistance and tensions, almost going violent. So we get very close. And in the film, you're expecting, when's it going to just blow up? And it doesn't. What happens is, out of nowhere, for no apparent reason that nothing that they were doing accomplishes, the deer scatter. At the same time, it looks like the state and the federal government conflict over here just settled. They settled it with money and some sort of arrangement and trade, and it was bizarre. It just seemed to stop inexplicably. And the question is, why? What stopped it? What ended all of this? And over here, we see when they walk up the hill, they look and they see that there was some sort of gigantic explosion attack in the city. Big one. All right, we're looking at real traditional warfare, and the film goes on later to your bunkers, even hinting it's nuclear, right? That there's a nuclear event happening and that you need to be protecting yourself from fallout or whatever. And they're afraid and they're shocked. It was the impact, the blast of some sort, the vibration that the deer felt made them scatter. And they only saw it after the fact because there was a mystery. Why'd they disappear? In other words, the civil unrest almost arrives at full-blown civil war. It almost gets there. We almost see the uprising achieve what it's supposed to achieve in this, fighting back and overthrowing whatever the previous powers are that were hunting them before. Okay, it gets to that point, but then it's cut short by an perhaps international event, or perhaps this is a representation of the, federal government doing something as an attack on cities and states within the United States. I mean, it's a possibility that they cut this short, not to act, for the purpose of the film, in order to show what's actually happening here. In a way that you're supposed to be able to identify. But we don't know exactly if this is an international thing, like this is war with a foreign power, or if this is internal. But it looks to me like it could be external, right? This is a type of strike that they're going to blame on somebody else, or that actually came from somebody else, that cuts short the unrest in the U.S. I mean, it'd be one way for the U.S. to distract an uprising, right? To basically kill infrastructure. Now is their chance to do false flag attacks that lead to people being too busy trying to survive to actually fight amongst themselves immediately. Now, all this coupled with the white noise predictive programming. Let's go back to white noise. This is very interesting and very important. White noise has some of the most important predictive programming that I've encountered in film, and it's often overlooked, I think, because, I don't know, the movie isn't nearly, I guess, as exciting as some of the other ones that get more attention. However, what we have here is after the toxic airborne event, which was part one of the film, and that toxic airborne event we've talked about in that series pointed to the attack in Israel against Gaza in Palestine, in that area. Okay. After that, they return to the supermarket as if the world just continues like normal. But they say, oh, the supermarket is even better because now they've opened the butcher area, which Murray calls, it says, it's like a Persian bazaar. Okay? So a Persian bazaar, Persia, Iran, an Iranian bazaar. And what you have in this bazaar is a slaughter happening. So after whatever happens in the Middle East has taken off and been going on or whatever, life seems to get back to normal for people in the West. And what happens is in the Persian bazaar, there's a slaughter. And right as he was saying that, after that, the butcher cuts a piece of meat and blood splatters on this Tibetan woman. Okay? And at least it seems to be represented as a Tibetan woman. A cleaver cuts into a rib. A speck of blood hits the face of the woman waiting. Do you know that Tibetans believe, and so on. Okay? And so this is a conflict of whatever it is that begins in the bazaar, Persian bazaar, seems to have regional consequences. Okay, so perhaps it leads to a regional war or something like that. Now, Murray goes on and says, do you know the Tibetans believe that there's a transitional state between death and rebirth? That's what I think when I come here. The supermarket is a waiting place. It recharges us spiritually. It's a gateway. So they view this whole scene as a gateway from one world to another, from a rebirth. You know, this is a life and death sort of thing. Okay, a transition state. And that's where we are here. And so whatever happens and begins with the slaughter in the Persian bazaar seems to lead to regional issues. And then what happens, and incidentally, the recent protests that are responsible for Trump's threats, moving this Lincoln carrier group over there, the USS Lincoln carrier group, into the region for potential conflict. That began at the historic bazaar where Iran's protests began. Why the once loyal bazaar merchants are now protesting in Iran, the Iranian bazaar protests. Okay? This is what's going on. And also, nearly a year ago or whatever, we had the butcher of Tehran who was killed. Another thing that possibly hints to this butcher scene in White Noise, the Persian bazaar, the butcher, the slaughter, and going on and so on. It's very interesting, these things. Now, what comes after that in White Noise? Now, Murray explicitly calls our attention to the fact that we need to be interpreting this whole supermarket scene and decoding it, deciphering it. He says, look at how bright it is, because he's talking about the supermarket being like a transitional state, like the Tibetans believe. Look at how bright, look at how full of psychic data, waves and radiation. All the letters and numbers are here, all the colors of the spectrum, all the voices and sounds, all the code words and ceremonial phrases. We just have to know how to decipher it. Okay, and then you get this list of anti-dandruff type things over the intercom system, products over the intercom. And what's going on, this is like treating symptoms and the solution or salvation of Western culture instead of going to, say, God or something like this religious. It's a consumer society. They treat symptoms. They really are deeply flawed, but outwardly looking okay and so on. And perhaps that's what's going on there. And then it continues, and they have this conversation. Murray, the Elvis scholar in the film, who's trying to get the Elvis role at the university, and Jack, the Hitler scholar who represents the Roman Catholic Church in the final symbolism, with his wife Babette representing the United States of America, and the two together representing, in a sense, the beast system, the whore of Babylon, this sort of thing, like we see in I Pick Goat 2. Now, they're having a conversation. How is that lovely woman of yours, Murray, the Elvis scholar, Elvis, the United States, Babette being this lovely woman to him, the United States, representing this. Well, she's been different somehow since the event. We've suffered a collective trauma. She wears her sweatsuit all the time. She stares out of windows, and cries for no reason. I don't know how to help her. This goes back to her fear of death and treating that fear of death with Dialar medication that's ineffective, but is basically just a way for people to feel like they're not going to die from whatever they've been told they need to be afraid of. And so he says, I've been distracted myself preparing for the Hitler conference and the kids. Well, back in school, Steffi no longer wears her protective mask. And I've got another doctor's appointment tomorrow. And what does he say about your status as a doomed man due to the fact that you have been exposed to the airborne toxic event? Well, I haven't told him, and since he hasn't found anything wrong, I'm not going to bring it up. I lie to doctors all the time. So do I, but why? They talk about this, and there's a lot to try to figure out there as far as the interpretation. But Murray, this is where it gets interesting for our conflict again. Murray brings up to Jack, and it's interesting. I think one thing that's going on there is the West is doomed. They're dying. They're trying to lie to themselves and others about the fact that there's no way out of it. The system that has existed for so long is clearly on its way out. It's failing. It's an inevitable death that's going to happen gradually and unfolding here, like Jack's death was supposed to come. And he doesn't really know what to do about it. He doesn't actually want to own up to it. He doesn't want to talk to the doctors about it. And then Murray says, the Elvis struggle you helped me with, trying to get the Elvis appointment instead of Katsakis, okay? It turns out, tragically, I would have won anyways. What happened? Katsakis, my rival, is no longer in the land of the living. He's Murray dead, lost in the surf off Malibu. During term break, I found out an hour ago and came right here. I'm sorry to tell you, particularly because of your condition. Poor Katsakis, lost in the surf, that enormous man. He was big, all right, enormously so. He must have weighed 300 pounds. Oh, easily. Dead. A big man like that. It's better not knowing them when they die, but it's better them than us. To be so enormous than to die. I can picture him so clearly. Maybe once we stop denying death, we can proceed calmly to die. We simply walk toward the sliding doors. Remember, the supermarket's a transition state. The sliding doors where you leave, that's your death. That's the end of it and going into your new birth or whatever it is, whatever comes after. And so he's talking about it in this way, and the enormous man, clearly Katsakis is not representing just a guy. They keep talking about the shocking nature of this gigantic, enormous, seemingly invincible thing out in the sea that goes down. Stunning. A representation, in effect, of American power goes down. And this is off the beach of Malibu now, or in the surf off Malibu, which would be, California. And that's why I mentioned possibly, I don't want to get too, when you start looking for specific details, like, it's going to be that aircraft carrier, because it comes from California, but it is one of the two aircraft carriers stationed in California. And, well, it's not right off Malibu. That could be a way to point to that. Another thing it could point to is right off Malibu. Malibu is sort of a place of wealth and where you go to die with sitting in your prosperity and so on. Perhaps it represents just the United States coming to its end in prosperity and so on. But what you have is this gigantic thing going down in the sea. So perhaps after the Persian Bazaar, you end up having a representation of an aircraft carrier going down or something like that, which is what leads to the death of the West, okay? And then we get this white noise. You proceed calmly to walk toward to die, walking toward the sliding doors. And then we have that sequence with the white noise. We have the 5 eclipses represented. We have tide like a wave, walking towards the door to leave as if it's going to take you out. I don't know if it's a literal wave, of course, but the idea is that there's it's just the direction it's going, like a wave that brings down Katsakis, okay, and it just goes calmly to the door. And then at the door, and we also get the Russian missile here idea. You've got the tabloid information. We get a lot of things, including that they're standing near the high C sign, which high C stands for high intensity conflict, like a major war, nuclear war, major regional war, something like that. Again, possibly mapping onto the Persian Bazaar, blood splatter on the Tibetan woman. And then you go to Mr. Gray at death's door, going to death. And that's who waits for you there. And what does Mr. Gray do when he comes in? That's where he comes in, and it dismisses his meditation, just walks by and flicks his cart away like he's nobody, interrupts his thinking and reflection, and puts an end to it without any care about him at all. Mr. Gray can get rid of the West, the U.S., Mr. Gray representing sort of the behind-the-scenes institutional powers that are controlling and organizing all of this and making it happen for probably purely analytic reasons and motivations, data-driven, just it's better for us. If they're gone, they retain their power, and so on. And he just flicks them away. Gone. And he's an antichrist. So he's got the scar on the hand, almost like Christ would have scars in his hands, right? The idea, except instead of saving them, he saves himself and kills them, as we see at the end of the film. But see, there's the high C, high-intensity conflict symbolism. Okay. And at the end, it cuts to the Malibu horizon, and a big, hairy man rides a giant wave on a surfboard. That's Katsakis, where he dies out there in the surf when he goes down. Shockingly so, because he's such a big and enormous and just should never have happened guy. Couldn't be able to go down. A guy can go down. An elderly guy who's overweight surfing can clearly go down and die. What they're talking about is something other than a man. He's representing something that goes down. And and after this, we go to the doctor's office, and we have Jack and the doctor's in his visit talking to the doctor, and he asks finally Dr. Liu about Dialar because his wife Babette, who represents the United States, is taking Dialar, an experimental drug that Jack's trying to find out what it is because he doesn't know it's experimental yet. And he says, "Have you heard of Dialar?" And Dr. Liu says, "Is that an island in the Persian Gulf?" Again, we're going over there in the Middle East here. No, it's one of those oil terminals crucial to the survival of the West. It's not. It's something that comes in a little white tablet. Never heard of it. Okay, Dialar, one thing that perhaps the West thinks is going to save them from this death they're trying to pretend like isn't happening. The death of the West, the death of the United States, the death of the Roman Catholic Church, the death of Western civilization as it's been sort of constructed over the last centuries and so on. They're trying to avoid it, this fear of death, by taking Dialar, perhaps by taking something related to the oil reserves, resources of the Middle East, Iran, right? Just like they did with Venezuela, okay? Perhaps this is the what is sort of being hinted at here, that we're seeing the West making a last stand for wealth and success and survival. That's in vain, okay? And that can explain perhaps why all of this is happening in Iran, and if something happens to a aircraft carrier or whatever. But if we're looking at this big picture, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't know, but I'm just saying this is something to watch for. If you look at this, what we have is these events unfolding. We're seeing perhaps this happening right now. We're seeing state on federal government threats, Waltz, the United States Insurrection Act, invading our city, invading our state, preparing our National Guard troops, which are our people from Minnesota, to resist the federal government, and so on. Right? That's head-on-head state versus federal government stuff. At the same time, we're seeing the hunted, the illegal immigrants, or the unregistered immigrants, and the left, and all of that being hunted, and then they're finally coming back and saying, no, we won't do this, and there's resistance, there's protests, there's threats of violence, and even violence on streets and so on. Okay, we're seeing this uprising, and the federal government hasn't been able to stop it yet, right? At some point, could there be a scattering because of some other event related to war internationally or something like that, or even a false flag attack blamed on them? That's completely possible right now. I mean, if it's the layout, it aligns very well. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It is interesting that it began at Persian Bazaar, just like in White Noise, which is a film we've been tracking for years, and we've talked about this scene. And so it's really interesting, really fascinating, and worth watching for. All right? Like, subscribe, share. Take care. Let me know what you think, too. Blessings.